I think clinicians can shine in ways that they maybe not think about if they just learn a little bit about what is the business owner thinking about? What are they worried about?
Right.
And put yourself in their shoes. And that can go a really long way when they're not expecting clinicians to think that way.
Kick it.
Welcome to Strata Stories. My name is Thomas Schreiber. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Strata PT. Strata PT combines your EMR and billing into one automated system to increase revenue and achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate for physical, occupational, and speech therapy clinics. Recently, Strata PT was ranked the #1 EMR and billing system in outpatient therapy and rehab from Class Research. On today's episode, Paul Singh, the CEO of Strata PT, talks with Dana Strauss, a physical therapist and policy health expert. Paul and Dana discuss how therapists can prepare to properly transition to non-clinical roles, cultivate relationships with career advocates and sponsors, and lastly, provide extensive value to business and healthcare sectors. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and billing works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo. Now, without further delay, here's today's episode.
So your latest newsletter, I told you in the pre-show, bored you to death. I'm probably going to get a therapy bill from you now. But I think it struck a chord with me. It was the title was "The Power of Strategic Communication" on your latest newsletter. And I'll summarize what I think the topic was, and you can kind of fill the gaps. But what you sort of the way I read it was like you were sort of talking about this idea that clinicians should be, um, communicating more, more involved in other activities, whether it's committees, conversations. And I interpreted it broadly to say, do it online or do it in whatever way makes you comfortable. Do it on social media, do it at your local APTA chapter. You were just saying, get more involved and get yourself out there. And I told you in the pre-show that it sort of struck a chord with me because it brings up this underlying topic of personal brand that I think sometimes is a kind of an icky conversation when you have this employer-employee relationship. Um, I would say I'm probably more progressive than most in the sense that, like, for the last 15, 20 years almost, I've encouraged all my employees to be very public on social media. And I take sort of the stance that what's good for the employee's personal brand is actually good for the company's. I would go so far as to say that if you're in any business these days, people don't follow brands anymore; they follow people. So I'm on that side of the camp. I would say, maybe our, one of our other content creators on the platform here is Rafi from Augusta, Georgia. I think he would say the same thing. He talks about his clinicians and how he encourages them to get on social media under their own social profiles and talk about what excites them. But the thing is most people aren't like this. I think most employers probably take a different stance. They say things like, hey, make sure that everybody knows that your opinions are not ours, and that sort of thing. So this is like maybe a broad, poorly articulated kind of question for you of like, I love what you're saying about communication, and I would summarize my view on that as saying, by doing that, you're increasing what I call your surface area for luck.
Yes, that's
You
right.
know,
Yep.
but
Greater
is
chance
there
of serendipity.
right, exactly. So, but what about the other side of this? So, you've been on the clinical side, you've been on the corporate world. Here you are building podcasts, or doing podcasts outside of your corporate job as well. Um, how do you think about this? Like, is there this broader topic of personal brand and that weird employer-employee relationship? And remember, our audience is mostly like clinicians,
Yep.
practice owners, things like that. How do you think about that? And maybe the answer is you're overthinking it, Paul. That's quite possible, by
No,
the way. But
no. This is the kind of thought that I hoped readers would put into what I said, and I will say I originally wrote this from the place of watching other clinicians for years, working alongside them, communicating with them to try to partner with them in strategic work along the care continuum and other things. One of the things that really stands out about for me at the time, remember, I've been around, is there, and I was around when it was almost all bachelor's therapists, right? I was one of the few with a master's degree when I graduated, one of the very few that I worked with. So this goes back, but one of the things that really stood out, and really as I moved further and further away from direct clinical care and being in the clinical environment, started to cement as one of the ways that I was able to be successful was not thinking only like a clinician and communicating like one. So looking at being able to communicate with non-clinicians and those in leadership positions and bring them, I didn't think about it this way at the time. Believe me, I can look back and say that's what I did. But bringing the perspective of a clinician, but with the view of the business at large, and trying
Mhm.
to contribute something valuable. And what I was trying to communicate in that newsletter at the surface was, don't be afraid to step in. Don't worry if it's outside of your hours. And if the original, your first thinking is, oh, this is just too much. This is extra work. This is too much. Think of it as just an opportunity to connect with those
Yeah.
who are having different conversations.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, realize that communication looks really different in some ways. Not that it's so much more complicated. It's, you know, when you get into those rooms and you sit on committees with directors and VPs and you're a part of a conversation, try to think like they're thinking. Not that you take away from yourself, but think like they're thinking. And how can you add value in a way that means something to them and their role as well? And with the eventual goal in my mind of, you're looking for sponsors or a sponsor at work if you can. And even if this is a clinic, a small clinic, how can even the clinic owner view you as something other than a clinician, so that when there are interesting, and important other additional things to do, maybe it's the social media angle, maybe it is building your personal brand, that they look to you for that, and that it's those folks, those non-clinical folks, that will give you those additional opportunities to shine and to show who you are to other people outside of being a clinician.
Yeah. Yeah. This is like one of those interesting kind of rabbit holes of a conversation, because one of the most common sort of gripes that clinicians seem to have these days is this
Yeah,
concept of like, hey, I'm doing all this work, I'm not getting paid, and then they
yeah.
start thinking about like, how do I advance my career, how do I get out maybe, um, and those are all fair concerns, of course, but nobody ever kind of really thinks about it this way, right? That they let's just say that they take even a mediocre step forward or a small step forward. If they do that at all, most people then network, whatever that means. They like go to
Hmm.
PPS, or they go to CSM, or they go to one of these other conferences, and
Yeah.
they just kind of float around, and not even that is kind of icky, even if But
Yep.
what you're talking about, I think, is more differentiated, and I would argue probably better, and that is just get involved, like go sit in there. This is probably not very scientific. I'm talking to somebody with a master's degree here, or higher, but I would say, um, I think about it from the perspective of like, this is the street MBA. Your point of like, hey, get in there, listen to the conversations, but you subtly kind of said something very, very important, which is you said, listen to how they're talking and what they're talking about and all that. And I think that's really, really important, because people will tell you a lot of things or say they do a lot of things, but if you can actually watch what they do, maybe listen to the exact words that come out of their mouth, how they interact in these committees and stuff like that, you can pick up quite a bit more that you'll never pick up any other way. Like whether it's body language, whether it's like their thought processes. But you only pick that up in person. You're not
That's
going to pick
right.
that up in a Zoom call
That's
from
right.
from afar. Um, but in that same email, you went on further to then talk about this concept of sponsors, which I had never heard before, but it makes
Mm.
a lot of sense. Can you talk about that? Because I guess where we're going with today's episode is really going to be about career advancement for
Or
clinicians.
yeah, thinking
Uh,
about careers a little differently even.
yeah. So can you talk about? I don't want to steal your thunder on this, because you started out this particular newsletter talking about communication, the power of
Hmm.
getting involved, and
Hmm.
all that, and then you use that to then segue into this concept called sponsors instead
Hmm.
of mentors. Do you want to just talk about that for a minute?
Yeah. So as the idea of a sponsor, I heard it in a TED talk. I did not make this up myself. It just really stuck with me. And I save things that resonate with me in my second brain. I've written about that too quite a bit. And this is a great example of when am recycling this piece of information that I learned years ago and trying to apply it. And when I look back at my own career, it is only because I cultivated, not thinking about it that way, I cultivated this sponsor relationship with somebody who's still to this day very important to me. And she helped me learn to believe in myself. But it was because I was able to demonstrate to her that I can think like the business leaders think. I'm not, quote, just a clinician. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with being just a clinician, but I am able to think in ways that they didn't anticipate necessarily a clinician being able to think. So I got involved in a couple of committees. This leader in this was a home health agency. This leader, and I were able to connect on interesting topics that I could tell by working with her were on her mind, and able to bridge some good ideas so that she was able to look at her problems differently with different solutions from a different angle. And over time, when an opportunity came up, I mean, I had been 15 years in, as a treating clinician at the time, but when there was a role that was developing where potentially she was going to have an opening on her team as a non-clinical role, I was in a perfectly suited position now, having developed this, genuinely, totally authentic relationship with her, where she went to bat for me. She had to go to leadership and ask them to change the job description on a role that was, in her department, to allow a physical therapist to hold the position. Because as a lot of listeners probably know, there are lots and lots of roles for non-clinical jobs in clinical places, right? So health systems, hospitals, whatever, home health agencies. She had to change it. So she had to go to bat for me to argue about why I would be the right person for this job. They HR had to go change the job description. This is a monumental thing 15 years ago now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I went on to work for her in several different roles beyond there, moved with her to a new department in the health system, helped to build something from the ground up. And
Yep.
all of that was only because I was able, willing, and interested in volunteering for a committee. There was time commitments, there was projects involved, and connect with her and others in that committee. So I became an obvious choice for something non-clinical, even though in a department of 100 PTs, there was very few thinking about, if
Right.
any,
Right.
thinking about communicating that way. So I just see it as a huge opportunity that we don't necessarily think about.
And what was like, to the best of your recollection, like when I hear you say that, like, and somebody listening to this is probably like, how much time do you have, Dana? Like,
Hmm.
was this, if you remember back to when you
Hmm.
first started doing this stuff, was this like an extra hour or two a week outside of work? Was it more than that, less than that? What was it like?
Yeah. So I was working as a home health PT, and you have a certain, this is typical in home health, you have a certain like productivity number for the week that you
Right.
have to meet.
Right.
So we were meeting maybe once a week and once every 2 weeks. And then we had, there were like small groups in that committee that were working on different things. And I maybe put in a couple hours a week maximum for a few months. This is not like but I made sure to be contributing significantly to that and use that as an opportunity to talk about other things that, were relevant, and that I knew from being and listening to a lot of leaders in that, where, right, they bring a couple clinicians in, but we're sitting in a room of leaders, board members, and, connecting what I saw as opportunities from being on the ground with
Mm-hmm.
what they were worried about and what was on their
Mm-hmm.
mind, and then learning more about that. I think clinicians can shine in ways that they maybe not think about if they just learn a little bit about what is the business owner thinking about, what are they worried about,
Right.
and put yourself in their shoes. And that can go a really long way when they're not expecting clinicians to think that way. I just add one other thing before I stop talking and see what your thoughts are. I was listening to Tony Maritato and Rafi Salazar, right, talk yesterday on a live, and I and maybe I didn't get this exactly right, but I think Rafi mentioned there's basically three different clinician types where, you're hiring either new grads or you're hiring, a few years in, and there are these different clinician types in terms of level of maturity in the profession are looking for different things. And, if you can be, if let's say you're mid-career or you're a few years out of school, if you can present yourself with some tweaks, just present yourself as someone who is thinking for them and with them about the business and how, like simple, even simple opportunities to help it be more efficient or help build camaraderie and a team, or just offer rather than ask, because we do a lot of asking for things and think that that's going to somehow get us what we want.
Yeah.
And yes, you do want to ask when you think you really deserve something, but how can we offer something back in return to the business owner or to the director or whatever
Right.
it is?
Right. How, Gary Vaynerchuk, who does a
Mm,
bunch of stuff on YouTube and has a couple books and stuff like that. He has this concept here. He says like give, give, give,
hmm.
and then make a small ask. Like in
That's
other
right.
words, like just yeah. So anyway, um, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to just share a little story and then see if you recall anything like this or even want
Hmm.
to like chime in on this,
Hmm.
because you're talking about like an earlier part of your career where you basically went from one level of visibility to
Hmm.
something more.
Hmm.
Um, I remember when hindsight's 2020, right?
Right.
So we can both talk about these topics now, looking back, because we can connect all the dots. But in the moment,
Hmm.
when you're starting to do these things, it's much more difficult because you don't know
Yeah.
what's ahead. You don't know. I remember one of the most difficult parts of one of my businesses was I had a business partner at the time, and we're good friends now, almost 20 years later. But there was a really rough patch for us at one point early in the one of my businesses where we were still, Twitter was new and we were all just trying to figure out how to like work social media, and nobody really knew what this was, like 15, 16, 18, 17 years ago. um, well, my for whatever reason, my account and my profile within this particular industry that I was in exploded relative
Mm.
to his. And there was a couple awkward months in there where we both didn't know how we felt about it, and I think there was like I can't speak for him, but I remember back then, like I felt as if he was threatened by it, even though we were like business partners, right? We're both like, it was just weird because we both had started the business as two unknown people. And then over the course of a year or two, this weird thing called Twitter takes off, and one of our accounts really gets big. And anyway, like there was this awkwardness, and I can only imagine it would have been even weirder if like he was the employer and I was the employee. We eventually had to have like a little bit of a heart to heart about it, and put some work into it. But I'm curious, like, was there ever anything like that as you started doing this? Like whether it was with peers that were like, "Oh, look at Dana, she's just doing stuff." Like, was that ever a thing? Maybe the answer is no, by the way. But
No, but I think the reason is probably maybe different than your experience. And well, number one, I'm the kind of person that's not looking around me necessarily and worrying about what other people think about what I'm doing. Yet I
yeah,
recognize lots of people probably judge it
yeah,
and think it's silly, and but that's fine. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't think, I think I'm really more generally oriented towards how can I bring value to those around me that don't anticipate it coming or don't think it's coming, and just
yeah,
let kind of serendipity take over from there,
yeah,
because it's interesting. Like, I'm one of what drives me is I don't want to be bored ever. And so I'm always trying to solve a problem. I mean, I don't, like, again, not think about it this way all day. I'm trying to solve a problem. But when I meet someone, and this goes, even now, work for a Fortune 10 company with extraordinarily talented people across the board. And when I meet someone, I orient myself towards what matters to them, what problems are they trying to solve, what do
yeah,
they care about, and what can I share with them that they may find valuable, because it's good for them and it's good for me to share it. And I've now built a new bridge. And I don't think of it as I'm going to ask them for something later. It truly doesn't cross my mind. It's more, I know it's better for this organization who I commit to supporting and helping them build and grow and be successful in every way.
Yeah.
But I also am just setting myself up for being spoken about in a positive way by others I meet that have influential voices.
Yep.
Right. And I'm learning from everyone I meet. I connect with a product leader who shares something interesting with me they're working on. And I
Yeah.
go write it down and research it later to learn more about it. And then
Hmm.
when I can connect a dot for them, a lot of times I am using my second brain. I'll connect a dot through that and go back to them and just share it and say, hey, this might be helpful for you. Or, I work in policy. So as things are moving very fast, and there's a lot of fear in everyone around in the health policy space. So if I know someone's worried about something and I can share something that I've come to learn, or a perspective I have that may be helpful for them, I share it, right? And I keep so it's kind of a way of just, I hate the word networking. It's not networking. It's just you're building, maybe this is the building the brand thing. I think of my brand as I want everyone I work with and those around me to look at me as a resource to them, and that I'm not going to say no to the,
Yep.
if you ask me to do something, I will always do it. And I
Yeah.
will get it to you when I say I'm going to. And you can ask me follow-up questions, and you can throw a meeting on my calendar just to pick my brain, and I'll be eager and excited about it. That thinking, gosh, if more therapists, even ones working right in a straight outpatient clinic, if you just think that way, that everybody you interact with, your fellow clinicians, the leaders, the front desk, anybody is a potential connection to share ideas and help everyone grow and be successful. It'll help that business, and you will never be forgotten for that, right?
It it's so when you talk about it, it's so obvious, it's so simple, but yet most people don't think this way. Most people, um, hopefully I don't get like slaughtered in the comments here, but so
It's
many
not your
clinicians.
listeners.
I mean, so many clinicians that are like, oh man, like the hours suck, or my boss just doesn't pay me enough. They say all these
Right.
things, and and it's hard not to sometimes get a little cynical. And I'm just speaking for myself. It's hard not to get cynical and say like, okay, so what are you going to do about it?
That's
It's
right.
it's easy to complain, but what are you going to do? And then
That's
and
right.
and then everybody gets quiet. Nobody says anything, right? And but what you're talking about is so obvious. Okay, so here's like the um, unprofessional truth to all the stuff we're talking about. The bar is so low that all you got to do is you got to suck less. Like be interested just a little bit more than somebody
That's
else in
right.
other people. Like it sounds unprofessional, but like
It's
we're
not
not.
though.
Yeah, it's not like you have to work hard here. You just have to be less worse than all the other boring clinicians that add no value to anybody else and just complain all the time. You can choose to be that if you want, but at some point you kind of have to wake up and ask yourself: is it more fun to complain, or is it more fun to maybe try something like this? You know,
That's
uh,
right.
it's like,
Help whoever owns your business, or the board, or whoever it is. Help whoever owns your business, from small clinic to Fortune 10 company. Help them be more successful in their business. And
right.
you shine in that way, and you will be viewed differently, and you have absolutely no idea. Only positive things can come of that. You don't have to know what they are. Clinicians want X plus Y and Z. One
Yeah.
plus two is three, and it doesn't
Yeah.
work that way. So if we can learn to drop that, we're right. You have a real chance of growing your career, clinical, non-clinical, or both, in ways you never think possible. And you also stop asking so much of the person who owns your business,
Well,
speaking to small clinic owners,
I
right?
would go one step further. I agree, by the way, and I would go one step further and say that if somebody were to test these ideas out and do them, I think there's two things that are true, at least in my life, that I've learned over the last 15 years doing this stuff, and maybe they'll resonate with you as well. Two things
Mm-hmm.
that become true. Number one, communication and visibility compound. They
Uh-huh.
don't they don't linearly grow, they compound. So every day that you practice this skill, every day that you add more value than you take, it compounds. And that leads to the second learning, at least in my life, has been that this becomes your moat.
That's right.
Because as it compounds, most people in most industries operate through um, some amount of gatekeeping. I know something, you need to go through me to get it. They don't say that publicly, but that's kind of how everybody
Yeah.
behaves, right? If you go the other way, it's counterintuitive. If you go the other way, you give so much value that people can't ignore you. That becomes the moat because it forces all these other people to change, and people just don't change. Uh, and so, it's like I was catching up. So we're recording this in early 2025. I was catching up with a guy that I had invested in about 13, 14 years ago, actually. And he went on to sell the business, did really well, lives in Dallas now. And anyway, out of the blue, he messaged me about a month ago and we caught up. And he's like, "What's this thing you're doing?" And I was explaining, and he's like, "Yeah, you're running the same playbook again, right? This is the same thing. You're just talking out loud, learning on public. You're not afraid to be an idiot in public." I was like, "Yeah, nothing's really changed. It's all the same. It's just not how it goes." And the point is, like, he goes, "Well, like, it's so obvious. Like, I'm surprised. Like, how are other industries not doing this yet?" And I was like, "I don't know. I think it just feels uncomfortable to people. Like, it's uncomfortable for people to put their face on something, or
Yep.
even in a one-on-one conversation. Because, like, when you said you listen to somebody, you find out what they're working on, you write it down, you research it later. Um, Most people wouldn't have the discipline to do that, but more importantly, I would say most people then wouldn't have the there's almost like this fear of, like, now sticking their neck out and giving something back, like, "Hey, check this out. I just looked this up. What do you think?" That putting faces on things, not just in social media, but just putting your face on something like that. People don't do it. It's scary. This isn't a psychology podcast, but I suspect it actually starts
No.
when we're kind of younger,
Yeah.
because we sort of don't. I don't know. I think, and maybe this is like I don't know if this is like a purely a Western world thing. I kind of grew up one foot in two different cultures growing up. I don't know if it's like a Western thing so much, because I don't see it. I see the same problems happening, back in India and Asia and stuff like that. But I think it's like it's taboo to kind of like stick your neck out. It's taboo to, like, because as kids you get made fun of for brown nosing or whatever, right? And maybe maybe it just programs our little invisible scripts, and then later on in life it just becomes even harder, and you have to almost like actively fight that lizard brain,
That's right.
if you want to get ahead, and maybe you don't want to get ahead, right? Like, I think,
But what
uh,
you don't have I don't mean, let me get it out and you realize this is not a criticism.
I love where this is going.
What you don't have the perspective of that I do is in PT school. I remember I did bachelor's and master's together in a 5-year program. Then 20 years later, went back and got my transitional DPT, right? When we're in school, bachelor's, master's, doctorate, there is just no, there's so little fractional amount of non-clinical learning. We're indoctrinated for years on this, right? On science, on in medicine, in analyzing research, in performing research, and we graduate like clueless about everything else that others have learned about, which I theorize is one of the reasons why there's so few clinicians. It's changing now a bit, but there's so few clinicians with all of this deep knowledge about what works and doesn't work in medicine and healthcare. So few of us working in improving the healthcare industry and in, doing things outside where we can create that value. And so we have to teach clinicians about, and that's sort of part of the impetus of that article was teach, how do you communicate in an email other than the way you're used to communicating in soap notes or however we're documenting these days? How do you just communicate succinctly and add value, and someone opens an email and doesn't go, "Oh, how am I going to get through this?" It's just, here's your takeaways, here's what I want to share with you, and there you go, and done,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That is not something we learn in school, and you have to take the first step. I wrote about compounding. Actually, it's funny you bring that up. Maybe 6 months ago or so, there's an article on compounding, because these are just life themes. Everything we do, if it's investing, there's compounding. If it's relationship building, it's compounding. If it's career development, it's compounding. And if it's clinical skills, it's compounding. I was intimidated coming out of school going, wait, I learned these, I learned about McKenzie techniques and practiced them for a few months on a clinical rotation. And now I have a patient in front of me and I have to be the one to figure out how to make them better.
Right.
Well, you have to start somewhere. And, not being afraid to be a beginner. That's what I wrote down when you were talking. You have to be a beginner over and over and over, right? Everything we learn and do, you're a beginner clinician, then maybe you're, a beginner learning about the basic economics of healthcare, but
Yep.
be okay being a beginner over and over and over, because you're not a beginner in lots of other things. But everything builds in a career, from at least my experience, from combining lots of new beginner as you become more advanced. All of these things can work together
Yeah.
for you.
First of all, I love these kind of like topics, because I don't think anybody really talks about them until they're all like griping over a happy hour somewhere and nobody's really listening. Um, so 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 first off, I would say what you described as like the educational experience, for this industry. I'll start by saying it's no different really than, even engineering. I went to school as a electrical engineering major and all that. And I mean, there were no classes in my undergrad or any of those
Mm.
programs that had to do with real world stuff. I mean, the closest to real world was look at this case study from this, but there was nothing like, hey, here's how you're going to interact with people in a meeting. Here's how you're going to, you know, so for whatever it's worth, it needs to get fixed, but it is the same, I think, in a lot of other disciplines as well right now. Um, that being said, though, there's this, putting on my other hat where I do a lot of, tech investing and stuff like that. I've come to believe, maybe I'm wrong, but I've come to believe that entrepreneurial thinking. So entrepreneurship is it's a weird word, by the way, entrepreneur, because like, believe it or not, in the Western world, English is really the only language where entrepreneur is a noun. The closest translation of that word in most other languages, if we think about Hindi, Arabic, even like Mandarin, the closest literal translation is really more of a verb. So, for example, in Hindi, we would say, that person has jugad, which like loosely translates to hustle, which kind
Mm-hmm.
of seems like a bad thing here in the Western world,
Mm-mm.
but it's like no, they're thinking a different way. Um, so now that I've rambled that out, I would say what I've kind of come to believe is that entrepreneurial thinking is difficult to teach, but I think it's easy to learn. And what I mean by that is like I don't know how to put a course. Maybe this is because I don't know how to teach people anything, but I don't know how you put a course together and say, "Hey, all right, everybody, here in 12 weeks, we're going to go through this syllabus, and I'm going to teach you how to think entrepreneurially." Um, I guess business schools try to do that with case studies, but back to what you talked about earlier about going to these communities, going to these conversations, sitting at the table with these people. I think entrepreneurial thinking can be learned because you kind of sit at these tables and you can't help but notice how people interact, how the conversation flows, how people think. And then because so few people do this, you get the ability to like bump into them at the at the cocktail hour, or you bump into them at the I remember that in the tech world anyways, there is this big tech conference in Austin called South by Southwest. I mean, it's massive. It must have 100,000 people that go there every March. Um, and what was interesting was in the earlier part of my career, I couldn't afford to buy a ticket to the thing. It was
Mm-hmm.
super expensive. But I would still go and I would just kind of hang in the hallways. It was at a big convention center in downtown Austin. And like most conferences, you can kind of get into the outer ring of the conference
Yep.
center without a badge, but to then enter into like
Mm.
the exhibition floor and the speaking events, you'd have to have a badge. So, I would just go and hang out and just hang out in those outer areas. And at the time, I was like, I just felt so embarrassed by it because I was like, ugh, like all these people have these badges. I was so embarrassed by it, but that I would like steal one of the lanyards and I'd get the whole thing. It would look like a lanyard, like a badge, but it actually did not have a ticket in it. It just had like a white card in it. I was just so embarrassed by it. But here's the point of the story. So I did that for about 2 years. So 1 year, then the next year I did it, and then finally, like things started really working out with one of my businesses, and so I'm like, okay, I can pay the $1,500. I'm going to do this. I bought the ticket. And I did what I thought. I was like, oh man, now I get to go in there and I get to check it out. And I remember coming back and I was like, that sucked. That was the worst. Because what I realized in hindsight was that, so now before I tell you what I realized, to this day, I still go to that conference once a year, but I don't buy a ticket. I still am the guy that just hangs outside. maybe I don't care as much now, so I don't worry about the lanyard, but I just kind of hang out outside. Um, but what I learned was that the most valuable part of a conference for me was not what the speakers were saying, because more often than not, they'd post their slides on social media, or I could download it
Hmm.
from their website. The most interesting part was like just hanging in the in the outer hallways, and when people walked from that exhibition floor to that one, oh hey, you're so and so, hey, what's up, and hey, can I just walk with you for 10 seconds, right? And I don't know, like the collisions were more valuable than the content. And
Yes.
that's kind of like, maybe that's like the summary of why your email really like resonated with me, because it put into words something that I've never been able to like articulate, but I've felt. And I would argue that a lot of other people, um, that have had that sort of experience probably felt the same way reading your article, is that like these things don't seem obvious because we don't talk about them. They're not something you learn about in school. Um, we grow up in this sort of understanding of our as we grow up, our understanding of relationships, at least in a professional sense, is about networking. You know, it's just such a weird thing. So anyway, I
People,
just
yeah, people
maybe
think
I'm just
about
a
trying
weirdo
to.
too.
You're
Yeah,
not weird. No, I think we orient ourselves naturally a lot of times to what I'm looking at a communication opportunity as. Well, they're going to think I want something from them, or what can I get from them? And instead of
bingo.
thinking,
What can I
what
give?
could potential right, what could potentially be interesting to them if I introduce myself and tell them that, something that they wrote that I read was resonated with me, and here's what it made me think about. We it's I think of it as almost selfish to not share those things. So if
Yeah,
I go up to someone who's, let's say leading a conference, and share something, this what I tell them may be the only person that shares that way that I viewed it from my own perspective, and that is adding value to them. So who am I to be selfish and keep that to myself? I'm giving them a compliment and sharing a perspective, and that, yeah, sometimes it's going to flop, but who cares?
yeah.
You're building the muscle to approach anyone that you want to in a respectful way and share with them, and you never know what they're going to share back, and you're going to learn from that.
Absolutely. I have okay, so now that we're so deep into this topic, like I can't really say anything now that's going to make me look more like an idiot. But I have this like theory, and it's not backed in any science. All I can tell you is I have these three rules that I'll explain here in a moment, that I can't back up with any science. I can't back up with any research, but I can tell you unequivocally that these three rules, um, that have changed the trajectory of my professional life. Now, I'll start by saying, most people don't realize this. I'll start by saying I am an introvert. I
Mhm.
by every test I've ever taken, I am like so far on the introvert scale, it's ridiculous. But most people are like, well, what? How in the world is this happening?
Yeah,
It's because it's the muscle. Yeah, I learned a long time ago that
that's
I'd
right.
either have to like figure it out, or I'd have to just accept my position in life. And so it's beginner mindset, all that stuff. So okay, now let's talk about these rules. um there is this game people play in life. The game is, nobody ever tells you about the game, but you know it when you see it. They tell you work hard, don't give up. They say all these things like that. um I remember, as I became more of an adult, I was like maybe 17, 18 years old. What I couldn't reconcile was that, you know if everybody was playing the same game, how come some people made it so much further than other people? However you define success, by the way, it doesn't have to just be money. It could be freedom, it could be power, it could be whatever. I couldn't reconcile this idea of like, there's this game we're all taught to play, work hard, whatever. But how come some people got ahead and others didn't? Um, and so I remember coming up. I wrote this down in a piece of paper, and I still have it framed up in my other office in the house here. But okay, I think there's a game people play. I think there is a invisible game that is how the real world really works, and it explains why some people get ahead while others don't. There's three rules to this invisible game. I'll say them and then I'll explain them real quick. Rule number one is that you never pick a fight with an elephant head on. Rule number two is that your brand, personally and professionally, your brand is not what you say it is, it's what other people say about you. And then the third rule is that if you understand the hopes, fears, and dreams of the person across from you better than they can even articulate it, you can do anything. Um, and so what does that mean? Well, don't pick a fight with an elephant head on. Let's just put that into the context of this audience, clinicians, practice owners, business owners, whatever. I would say the elephant is what everybody else is doing. So if you're a clinician, for example, and you're not happy with your pay, you must not do what every other clinician is doing. What are they doing? Most of them do nothing. Some of them, complain loudly. Some of them, but ultimately, you cannot do those things. You must try something else. Whether it's doing what you're talking about, whether it's go back to school, you just got to do something else. Do not go fight the elephant head on. You will just get lost in the mess. The second rule that talks about personal brand and professional brand, it's like you can say anything. People can say like, I'm hardworking, I'm diligent. It's like, oh, well, no, that's not like I will tell you, I am not disciplined at all. I'm probably slow at emails. I suck at my schedule. I'm late to everything, you know. But I get the job done, and that's like results is really what I'm after, and that doesn't work for everybody, but it's worked for me. But your brand, the thing is to just understand that it's not what you say it is; it's what other people say about you, and you have control over that by what you do and what you don't do. Um, and then the third rule, really about hopes, fears, and dreams, is to your point, is really about before you even ask anything, you really have to ask for before you ask for anything. You must give interest. You must give something, and ultimately, once you do that, you build this relationship, and you
Mhm.
understand how they think. You understand, and you can then take that anywhere. I mean, obviously, don't use it for bad, but you could, they want to change jobs. If you offer to help, who knows? I mean, just help. You never know where that's going to go. Um, I, anyway, so this invisible game, I think, is how the world really works. And notice that none of it ever mentions anything about hard work, because this is like I was talking about this with a buddy of mine yesterday. Uh, Business, we've all when we think about careers and stuff like that, we've been trained implicitly to believe that hard work is a differentiator between those that succeed and those that don't, and that is incorrect. Hard work is relative, and it's also table stakes. Like you kind of just have to get whatever your job is
That's right.
done, right? That's table stakes. Um, the reality is we have to think about careers and business as a series of games. And what I mean by that is like you don't get any extra credit for extra work. Meaning like if you're in the Olympics and you're doing a hard gymnastics routine, okay, you're going to get some extra points.
Right.
We
Right.
have to convince people to think about careers and businesses as a series of games. What
That's
is it
right.
that I'm trying to achieve and how do I win this game? Not at the expense of others, by the way, but rather like when we think about games, it's the fastest path to the outcome we want, right? Because time is the finite resource. Um, so anyway, now I'm turning into like the Indian Tony Robbins, and I should probably
No,
start a
but
conference at some shady hotel by an airport or something.
no. What is coming up for me is you wrote on LinkedIn yesterday about what you would hope a therapist would say as their patient walked out the door. If I'm maybe butchering that a little bit, but I know that's just kind of a simple example of what we're talking about. To add value by demonstrating just by what you're doing in your actions, that by switching up communication a bit with your patient as they leave or before their next visit, or as Jerry Durham talks about, right, in prepping the front desk, however you communicate, that can be a differentiator in your patient's follow through. And just if you understand that maybe your clinic has a difficult time with patients completing their plans of care or showing up for their second visit, if you can demonstrate that you have a different level of success in this, you stand out just in that one simple way, right? This is just direct clinical work. If I was working in a clinic now as a staff therapist, I would be looking at what are the opportunities for growth of referrals. Who's around me that I could be strengthening the partnership with, and sharing those insights with the clinic
Yep.
owner, and
Yep.
offering to go out and help build those relationships. It doesn't matter that you're a clinician; you can do those things. You don't have to go to school to build referral relationships. You can just go and share and get to know people, even as basic as that. Right. So we can take small steps that are meaningful and so much more interesting. And I love the point you made, Paul, about, you just do what you have to do your job well, and that's table stakes. I think as clinicians, I read this so much on LinkedIn, this feeling like I'm a clinician and I should never leave clinical work and I shouldn't want anything except to be the most exceptional clinician. And Tony talks about this too. You can be an excellent clinician. You don't have to be the top 0.05%. And it really doesn't matter. You're going to get the best results by exceptional communication with your patients, by helping them be engaged in their care and getting them to show up again. And that's going to be in how you motivate them, in your soft skills. We've all, as doctors of physical therapy, we should all have pretty strong clinical skills. All right, that's no one's taking that away from you. But how about just growing some of those other things that really don't take a whole lot of extra work, but boy, they can make you feel like you're contributing more, and your business owner is going to see that. They can't not see it, right?
Yeah, there's a book that I think about a lot when we talk about these kinds of topics. It's called "So Good, So Good, Be So Good They Can't Ignore You." And that book actually is I think a great read for anybody that's made it this far in the episode. Is that it talks about this idea that really backs up what you just said. Like, if you add so much value, whatever that means in whatever industry you're in, if you add so much value, you become unignorable. Just a personal anecdote real quick. I want to be respectful of your time, but personal anecdote. I do a lot of running, and anyway, my my knee's been bothering me lately. So I scheduled an appointment with my local PT here. I go to him all the time. Anyway, what was interesting, just in the context of what you just said there, he's like, "Hey, listen, yeah, you're going to need to come in like 7 times. Let's just knock this out over the next 2 weeks." And I was like, "Oh man, yeah. Let me." He's like, "Yeah, let's just go ahead and schedule it, And I was like, "Yeah. Let me. Oh man, like my kid's schedule, whatever." And he's like, "Hey, look, I'm not trying." He's like, "I'm not trying to be pushy. Whether you want to schedule now or you want to call me back later, all you need to know, Paul, is if we don't finish this plan of care, you're not running that marathon next month. It's just not going to happen." And what was interesting was it just that small. It's such a overlooked little detail, but
That's
he
right.
connected my inaction or my potential inaction with something he knew I wanted.
That's
He
right.
didn't say, "Paul, I need you in here because that's the only way I get paid." He said he worded it in such a way that I'm like, he knew in the small talk I had made that I was going to try to run this marathon in March, and he didn't use it. I know it sounds icky, but like he put it in a way where I have to choose now how important this is to me, and that subtle little difference now means that his practice owner is going to get those visits, like that's where I'm going to go, and I had to make that choice. So, um, this, I didn't plan for this conversation to go this deep into it, but I'm glad it did because like I said, I really believe these are the kind of conversations that seem to happen in private. It's
Hmm.
like when a bunch of practice owners or clinicians get together and nobody's looking and all the social media is turned off and 2 glasses of wine later, everybody's just kind of griping about stuff. These are the conversations that come up because everybody has to look so put together at the conference or they have to look so put together at the office. Um, so I appreciate you kind of sharing it, but yeah, that newsletter um, was on point this week. It was
Oh,
awesome.
I'm so glad. I'm finding that what's resonating the most by readers is when I talk about kind of clinicians, looking at things differently or organizing their minds around knowledge management and communication and kind of concepts, that they don't necessarily think about, but that I'm connecting in ways that resonate with them. I am finding that this is where I'm getting a lot of
Yeah,
feedback. So
yeah,
it's a feedback loop.
yeah.
Again, creating a newsletter, you're putting yourself out there. I say things that sometimes I look back and go, oh, I could have phrased that better. I should have taken more time to explain that. And now I'm making a thumbnail and I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, I'm in Canva, like, or figure out what's the thumbnail, or I'm just going to get it done. I've learned to build a website. I'm just constantly teaching myself because I'm not afraid to be a beginner. Doesn't make me special. It just means I want to keep being a beginner in as many things as possible. And then some of those things I'll become relatively proficient in, and I'll find ways to connect the dots. And gosh, if I know we've been talking for a while, so I'm sure lots of folks haven't been able to stick around this long, but if there's one takeaway I can give to clinicians, it's just keep being a beginner, right?
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. Strata PT combines your EMR and billing into one automated system to increase revenue and achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate for physical, occupational, and speech therapy clinics. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and billing services work, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.